what is inside of these people's minds. Like what belief system are they holding on to? What doctrines, what verses, what surahs, what could possibly motivate you to behead a baby, for example? David, thank you so much for coming on the channel. The reason that I wanted to reach out to you is because for me as a layperson looking at everything that's happened over the past week in the Middle East and Israel, it's absolutely gut-wrenching, it's horrifying, and I see a lot of people commenting on this from a geopolitical perspective. I look at Hamás, I see that as an acronym, that it's Arabic, and that in that acronym is Islamic. And so also having spent 2 months myself in Israel, I've seen that there's a deeper undercurrent to the behaviors that are playing themselves out, that there's a spiritual and a religious dimension to all of this, that it's not just political. And so I wanted to bring you in to help connect some dots from the news that has just broken and the history of Islam and the doctrines that exist within the Quran and the Hadith. So I'm asking you to kind of help bridge some of these gaps and to speak to this issue from more of a religious, spiritual perspective. Help us understand what's the connection points here.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could kind of start off with just the general lead up to offensive jihad that we find in the Muslim sources. Muslims will go, especially Western Muslims, will go to passages in the Quran and say, look here, it says there's no compulsion in religion. See, that's what Islam teaches. So all these people trying to force religion on people, they have nothing to do with Islam. And it never crosses their mind to actually read a verse in context, or to read it in its historical context, or to interpret it in the light of the most relevant component of interpreting the Quran here, which is doctrine of abrogation, where earlier revelations can be canceled or abrogated by later revelations. None of that. Just here's this verse, so you see Islam is peaceful. Whereas you can go to the classical commentators. No one interpreted if you go to the first 1,000 years of Islam, no one interprets these verses the way that modern Western Muslims try to make these verses sound peaceful. So what you actually find when you go to, matter of fact, you could go anywhere. You could go to the Quran, that's supposedly the speech of Allah. You can go to the Hadith. This is the works and teachings of Muhammad. You can go to the Sirah. These are like biographies of Muhammad. You go to the Tafsir. These are the commentaries. Wherever you go, you find, and they'll break it down a little differently, but you'll always find some sort of successive stages of jihad depending on how things are going for the Muslim community. And so if you just go to the life of Muhammad, when Muhammad is a persecuted prophet in Mecca and he only has about 100 followers, he preached a message of a kind of tolerance. Hey, don't attack us. We're not attacking you. Let God judge. And people will go to these verses and say, you see, that's what Islam teaches. No, that was in that context. Later on, Muhammad leaves Mecca and he goes to Medina, sets up shop there. He forms some alliances, and by this time he has more followers. Then the message of the Quran changes to one of defensive jihad. You're fighting, but you're fighting because someone else did something first. So this could be someone's persecuting the Muslim community, or someone drove you off your land or something like that. Someone's attacked. It could even be like criticism. Someone's making fun of you and you need to retaliate with violence. But the main idea of the defensive jihad stage is someone else is starting it. Someone else is doing something first, and now you're reacting to it. And so you have Muslims who will point to these passages and say, look, it says, fight them until they stop fighting you. Look, so there it is. It's self-defense. That wasn't the final marching orders either, because later Muhammad and his companions formed the most powerful group in society. So they dominate the Arabian Peninsula, and the message changes to one of offensive jihad. And there it's fighting people because of what they believe. At this point, you're not fighting people because they attacked you or because they persecuted you or anything else. You're fighting people specifically because of what they believe. And so this is offensive jihad. And what's amazing here is you can look at any country in the world. It still follows this pattern. if Muslims make up like 1% of the population, then what's the message of Islam there? It's, hey, Islam is all about peace and tolerance, getting along with everyone. If the Muslim population gets to 20 or 30%, suddenly the preachers start calling for defensive jihad. Oh, they're criticizing Islam, they're saying this, they're saying that. Then we retaliate with violence. And once you get to where Muslims dominate the society, everyone else has to be a second-class citizen. Everyone else has to be subjugated. And so it's just amazing that here we are 14 centuries later, and the same pattern that we find in the life of Muhammad is now imprinted on countries around the world. So the one way to think about it, and we can think of this from a Christian perspective because we're familiar with this. You have violent passages in the Old Testament and so on. But if you were to read the Bible from beginning to end and say, what am I commanded to do now? It wouldn't be, hey, go fight the Canaanites or something like that. We have commands that are directed towards us. So we understand our final marching orders, right? There are all sorts of things happen along the way. But the covenant that we are under and the commands that are directed towards us are things like love your neighbor as yourself, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, and so on. There's a role for governments to do things and to maintain order and so on. But as far as how we are to live as Christians, we understand what our final marching orders are, and we understand how that differs from marching orders for groups that came before us. In Islam, it's kind of the reverse. Muhammad starts off and it's, hey, let's not fight here. And then eventually, okay, we will fight. But if you guys start it. And then eventually you get to Surah 9, verse 29, fight those who do not believe in Allah. And it specifically refers to the people of the book, that's Jews and Christians. And says we have to be subjugated until we pay the jizya. That's tribute money we pay to the Muslim community specifically to acknowledge our inferior status. We're paying you because you're better. And Muslims will say context. It's weird that it doesn't come up when they're quoting passages that are supposedly peaceful. They don't want to read those in context. But when you can read the context of the commands to fight those who do not believe, read the entire context. There's not one word about this being about self-defense. Every justification for fighting Jews and Christians and subjugating us and making us pay money in that passage, and anyone can read it. The entire passage starts Surah 9, verse 28, goes on to Surah 9, verse 33. There isn't one word about self-defense. Every justification for fighting us is our basic religious beliefs or practices. Christians have to be subjugated because we say Jesus is the Son of God. Jews have to be subjugated because they supposedly call Ezra the Son of God, even though you will have trouble finding one Jew in all of history who said that. That's the Quranic justification for violently subjugating Jews. And so if you were to read the Quran and say, what are the commands that are directed towards me? Not what was directed towards Muslims in Mecca when they made up a tiny percentage of the population. What are the commands directed towards me specifically now? Interestingly, that's going to come down to what sort of situation you're in, because the overarching pattern that you find in the Quran is you do what is in the best interest of the Muslim community at a certain time. So if you are 1% of the population, you can't hope to win a physical confrontation with the unbelievers. Do what Muhammad did when he was in that situation. What did he do? Peace and tolerance. If you get to a point where you can fight, but you're not able to dominate a society, great, fight defensively. Other people start it and start something, do something, criticize or something. You have a violent reaction to let people know that won't be tolerated and that any sort of provocation will lead to violence. If you form the biggest group in society, then you subjugate everyone and everyone becomes a second-class citizen. And so that's the pattern that you find in Islam. I would just want to be clear when I say this, it doesn't mean your average Muslim knows this. If you're talking to a Muslim here in the US and he says Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance, he probably believes it. He might not, but he probably believes something like that because that's what the Muslim preachers will say in this kind of context. And so you got to be. I don't want everyone running around saying, aha, you say Islam's a religion of peace, but I know once you get to power, you want to subjugate people. We're talking about what Islam actually teaches here and, not what a particular Muslim believes. But that is what Islam teaches, that jihad proceeds in stages. And the final goal is subjugating the entire world so that, as the Quran says, all religion is for Allah.
Okay, this is a very helpful point, because what I was doing is I was trying to understand what is inside of these people's minds. Like what belief system are they holding on to what doctrines, what verses, what surahs, what could possibly motivate you to behead a baby, for example. That's something that's so egregious and so insane. It's actually a war crime, obviously, and it's just out of the normal variety of evil. And I've noticed there's this trend, right, in history. When you see atrocity, you have to sort of dehumanize the group that you end up committing mass violence again, whether that's, the unborn, if we want to go into the kind of abortion conversation, whether that's the Jews during the Holocaust or under that kind of Darwinian, understanding that Hitler had. There's always a dehumanization that precedes the atrocity, or maybe I shouldn't say always. There's probably exceptions where it's not, but that is a common reality. And so that's what I was just trying to put myself in the mindset of Hamas. Like, how can you do this and celebrate it? What ideas are you believing, and where are those ideas sourced from? And so you're saying, so what was the reference that you just gave there?
Surah 9, verse 29 was the verse commanding Muslims to violently subjugate Jews and Christians, specifically based on our beliefs, but that's the entire passage. But just so you know, that's kind of tame by some of the things the Quran and the Hadith say.
Well, that's what I wanted to unpack is what, like, can you kind of give us some bullet points of like what is the mental furniture that someone would have in order to be able to carry out some of the things that we've seen, basically?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with the history of Muhammad when he went to Medina. When Muhammad went to Medina, when Muhammad went to when he left Mecca, went to Medina, he there were three large tribes of Jews there. And at first, Muhammad seemed to really think that the Jews were going to acknowledge him as a true prophet. So when Muhammad was in Mecca, he's surrounded almost completely by pagans. And if you look at the revelations Muhammad receives during this time, the revelations are along the lines of, hey, it's Muslims, Jews, and Christians, and we're all united as monotheists against the pagans and the polytheists. We're united against them. Later, Muhammad travels to Medina, where there are three large tribes of Jews. They reject him as a prophet and start making fun of him, like, you are the most obvious false prophet we've ever come across here. And Muhammad's position changes completely. It's a period of 10 years. Over a period of 10 years, he goes from thinking he's best buddies with the Jews to calling for their complete eventual annihilation and extermination. And so again, these things can happen very rapidly, and just because Muhammad felt disrespected by the Jews, then you get these calls to completely massacre them. And Christians for a while it became, hey, it's Muslims united with Christians, and we're against the Jews and the polytheists. And then the Christians, of course, rejected him as well. And then it became, fight those who do not believe in Allah, and Jews and Christians have to be subjugated. But I can give you a couple passages specifically on the issue that you mentioned of dehumanizing people, because that is absolutely huge in the Muslim sources. But I wanted to first give another verse that is that's in that middle period where Muhammad shifts from Jews, Muslims, and Christians united against polytheists to Christians and Muslims are united against Jews and polytheists. This is Surah 5, verse 82 of the Quran. Verily, you will find the strongest among men in enmity to the believers, Muslims, the Jews, and those who are al-mushrikun. Mushrikun are people who associate partners with Allah, so you can think of them as polytheists or idolaters or something like that. So verily, you will find the strongest among men in enmity to the believers, the Jews and the idolaters. And you will find the nearest in love to the believers, those who say we are Christians. So notice now it's Muhammad's appealing to the Christians. See, we're all on the same side here. But notice, this is Allah speaking in the Quran, and he says that the worst enemies of the Muslims, this is just a rule from Allah, the worst enemies of the Muslims are Jews and polytheists. So you have passages like that. You also have some pretty wild passages that are directed towards Jews and Christians. So Surah 98, verse 6, calls Jews and Christians the worst of creatures. The people of the book who reject Muhammad are the worst of creatures. So notice we're lower than dogs. We're lower than dogs. We're lower than pigs. You can go to the hadiths and you find all these interesting passages where Muhammad starts claiming that Allah turned a group of Jews. Some people misrepresent and say that all Jews were turned into other creatures, apes and pigs and so on. It's actually a certain group of Jews, according to Muhammad. But at first, he doesn't know what the Jews were transformed into. So he starts coming up with all these hypotheses. One day, someone cooks some lizard and offers him a lizard. And Muhammad says he doesn't want to eat the lizard because this may be a Jew. The lizard may be a Jew that Allah transformed into a lizard. Because he's angry at the Jews. There's another passage where Muhammad actually advocates his followers perform a weird kind of scientific experiment. It's a weird kind of scientific experiment. He says if you put sheep's milk in front of a rat, it will drink the sheep's milk. But if you put camel milk in front of a rat, it won't drink the camel milk. What is this? This is the proof that these rats are actually Jews that have been transformed into rats. And he says they don't drink camel milk because you're not allowed to. Jews weren't allowed to. And so he says these are rats that were once Jews, and they're still kosher. They're still following Jewish dietary restrictions, even as rats. Wow. And so eventually Muhammad discovers that it was actually apes and pigs that the Jews were transformed into. So you have those kinds of passages. You have Muhammad saying in Sahih Muslim that he eventually decided to expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and not leave any but Muslims. So notice it's first, hey, we're all on the same side. Then it's all of you have to be off this entire peninsula. You can't be in Arabia anymore. Notice, interesting. So what if you look at what's going on at the history of this conflict that's going on right now? The way it gets represented as you have these Palestinians and they live on the land, and then the Jews show up, push them off the land, and now these guys are refugees, and the Jews just took over. That's not what happened at all. But notice that's the accusation, and you could do a hypothetical. Suppose that is what happened. Suppose Jews just said, "Hey, we're in charge now. We're stronger than you. We're pushing you off the land." Mm-hmm. That's exactly what Muhammad did. I mean, there were Jews and Christians living on the Arabian Peninsula for centuries. They've been there a lot longer than he had. He comes along, starts his new religion, and then says all Jews and Christians off the land have to go. So it's just interesting, like the level of hypocrisy there. Your prophet said that's a perfectly fine thing to do. Just, hey, we need a place where we have one religious community here that's not interfered with by anyone else. So we're pushing you all off the land. And so that is a Muslim position. And then, of course, there you have pushing off the land and so on. But you also, I'm sure you're familiar with, and there are a bunch of these. So I'm just going to read one. But this is from Sahih Muslim. It was narrated that Abu Hurairah said, the Messenger of Allah said, the hour will not, so this is the hour of judgment, the hour will not begin until the Muslims fight the Jews, and the Muslims will kill them until a Jew hides behind a rock or a tree. And the rock or tree will say, O Muslim, O slave of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him.
And what's the reference for that?
That's in this edition. This is the Darussalam edition. There are like three different editions of Sahih Muslim that you might find. But this in the Darussalam, it's Sahih Muslim 7339. It'll probably have a different number if you look it up online. Okay. But it's not hard. You can go to anyone who wants it. You can go to Muslim site, sunnah.com, sunnah.com. Look up, you will fight the Jews. You can just search for that. It'll give you a pile of these hadiths about fighting the Jews, subjugating the Jews. And notice it's Muslims are eventually going to go around exterminating Jews to the point where Jews are just running around hiding. And nature itself is going to help the Muslims, saying, hey, so that the rocks are going to cry out, hey, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come kill him. Trees are going to yell out, hey, there's a Jew behind me, come get him. Nature is going to assist Muslims in wiping out the Jews. And you need that for the hour to come. So guess what? No virgins for you until you completely wipe out the Jews. So this is what you find.
Okay, so because this is what I was trying to understand is terrible things are done in the name of Christianity in the name of Christ, right? Cults have been started in the name of Christ. Children have been molested in the name of Christ. Horrible things have been done in the name of Christianity. But in those instances, it's always a deviation, a dramatic deviation from what is actually Christian, what is actually something that reflects Christ. With what you're describing now, I'm trying to understand the extent to which Hamas is deviating from actual Islam and creating like a weird version of a violent cult, or the extent to which this is actually an outgrowth of historic Islamic doctrine.
Well, it'll be a combination. It'll be a combination because they are in a certain spot
Sure.
in history and so on, and there are events that are surrounding this. But I would say that Islam is the main obstacle to any sort of solution to this situation. Because yeah, as Christians, we would, I would love to see some sort of two-state solution where they're not attacking each other.
Right.
The reason there's no two-state solution is because one side wants to completely wipe out the other. And as long as one side wants to completely wipe out the other, then the other is not going to want to give in either to the group that is bent on wiping them out. And so there are Palestinians. I mean, there are Christian Palestinians, but there are Muslim
Mhm.
Palestinians as well who would love to just be able to live their lives and
Right.
raise their children and send their kids to college and work on their careers and stuff and actually have good lives. There are plenty of Palestinians who would like that. The Jewish community would generally love to see that, would love to see everyone living together, not trying to completely slaughter each other. The main obstacle to that is going to be the commands of Muhammad and the people who are actually following that, which in this case would be Hamas. But you have this idea. If you read the Muslim sources, the perspective that you get on the way world events are supposed to go, it looks like, hey, Islam's just going to keep expanding, keep expanding, keep expanding, keep expanding, keep expanding until polytheists, atheists, any of these kinds of groups, they're wiped out. They're given the option, you either have to convert or die. Jews and Christians are allowed to live and to remain Jews and Christians because we're the people of the book. We according to Islam, we supposedly have revelation from God that other people don't, and therefore we have a privileged status. But we have the option of paying tribute money, and then Muslims aren't supposed to kill us. They're not supposed to kill us as long as we are second-class citizens and we acknowledge our inferiority and we pay our money on time. They're not supposed to kill us.
Mhm.
So Islam is just supposed to keep expanding until it dominates the world. And you're a Muslim, you're looking at this going, what's going on here? Western nations with majority Christian populations are massively more powerful than us. Jews, there's several million of them, and we got 2 billion people, and we can't defeat these Jews. It's sort of like psychologically traumatizes you. Like, this is not the way things are supposed to be. This is not the way things are
Mhm.
supposed to be. And once people start realizing that the world is not the way it's supposed to be, if Islam is correct, there are two basic directions that Muslims have gone in. Some Muslims actually start like doubting Islam, or they want to reinterpret Islam, or they want to modernize, right? Because it doesn't make sense. Why are these other nations so much more powerful than us? Maybe we're doing it wrong. Maybe we need to modernize. Maybe we need to get with the program and be more like this. And so if you look at pictures of Afghanistan or Iran in like the 1960s, look just like Western nations. Everyone's dressing like they're Westerners and so on. Now very different because you have the opposite. You have the opposite conclusion, which is no, we are supposed to subjugate the world, but Allah is punishing and testing us right now because of our disobedience and because we're compromising and so on. And He's not going to bless us to fulfill our mission of conquering the world until we have weeded out all innovation in our religion. We've weeded out all heresy, and then Allah will bless us to conquer the world. And that was the mindset of ISIS, right? That's why people were wondering, hey, why are they going around killing Shia Muslims? They shouldn't be doing that. Why are they going around killing all these different people? They're cleansing the community. They're cleansing the community of any sort of sin or rebellion in the belief that then Allah would bless them to take over the world. And that's sort of the mindset of Hamas right now. We've compromised with the Jews. We've given in to the Jews. We just have to keep flinging ourselves up against it, putting our lives on the line, showing Allah how devout we are, and eventually He'll bless us with the total victory over them.
Okay, last question in an attempt to end on a slightly redemptive note, because this is heavy. In the same way that with COVID and during that time, it seemed that a lot of people had to face certain realities and had to face a level of evil, and that actually caused them to react and to think and actually push them towards God. And I know that story happened I mean, I can think of a lot of even public figures who moved closer to God as a reaction to everything that happened in 2020. Do you think there's a chance or an opportunity here for the more nominal Muslims, the less purist or less fundamentalist, who are maybe seeing what Hamas has done, seeing that in your face evil, and to maybe pause and consider and be open to some alternatives or willing to sort of self-reflect? Or I don't know, what do you think there's an opportunity here for even evangelism or, as a Christian, or do you think, I don't know, do you think there's an opportunity within this moment, I guess is my question.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, this is definitely an opportunity to point out, hey, the things that Hamas is doing in their obsession with killing Jews, and just looking around at various Muslim groups around the world who are celebrating killing random people in Israel. In Australia, there was a rally and they were chanting "Gas the Jews."
Mm.
This is on Australia, right? So you have that kind of thing going on, and you have two reactions, right? You have some people who will actually become more devout Muslims. They'll feel like, hey, we're under attack. All these nations are siding with Israel against these guys. We need to become more strict and more devout. And so you'll have people go in that direction, and you'll have other people who are condemning the actions and saying, oh my goodness, look, these guys just keep causing problems over and over again. And a group like Hamas won't even let their own people, the people that they're supposed to be helping, they won't even let them live in peace. Because keep in mind, if they went a few decades without a terrorist attack, they probably have two-state solution. In fact, I would have to say, if you're Hamas, think about this. A lot of people don't think about this. If you're Hamas, is it actually in your best interest to improve the lives of Palestinians?
Right.
No. If you improve their lives, they're going to become less inclined to go around waging terrorist attacks and getting the inevitable retaliation and so on. The better their lives are, the more they have to lose. Once you get bombed down to nothing, you have nothing to lose, and that's your next generation of terrorists. So it is not in the best interest of Hamas to help the Palestinians in any way. It's in their best interest to keep getting the Palestinians bombed in retaliation, because that's your next generation of jihadis. And so there are people who would look at all of this, and there are Muslims who would look at all this and just find this repulsive, even though they can't admit it because they'll be called traitors by other Muslims. But there are Muslims who will look at this and say, oh, this is horrifying, this is evil, this is bad. And if you can actually show them, well, this goes back to Muhammad. The main reason that Hamas cannot negotiate or actually come up with any sort of agreement with Israel is because they're supposed to wipe them out. According to them, they're supposed to wipe them out. Jews are not supposed to be in that position of calling shots for us. And so they just can't take the loss on that one. And so it's no, we wipe them out, or we just keep fighting until we do. There are people who will look at that and say, oh, that's horrible. If you show them, no, that's actually Muhammad, that the source of these ongoing problems are, and it's not just there, it's in all kinds of places. In Nigeria, Christians are being slaughtered by jihadis. India, Hindus are being slaughtered by jihadis. Right there, Israel, Jews are being slaughtered by jihad. What's the common thread here? Because you could say, hey, the problem isn't us, the problem isn't Muslims, the problem is the Christians and the Jews and the Hindus and the Buddhists and the atheists and the Yazidis and the Sikhs and the Zoroastrians. They're the problem. But some people actually look at it and go, what's the common element in all of these issues? And if you trace that back to Muhammad for them, then they see it. And it's just one of the most common reasons that people leave Islam is they become repulsed by the violence that it keeps causing. So we need to be aware of situations that are going on in the world. When something is a result, you don't want to just blame everything on Muhammad if Muhammad's it doesn't actually have anything to do with it. But if the root cause of some horrible problem in the world goes back to Muhammad, we need to be able to point it out for our Muslim friends and say, look, this is your prophet here. Do you really believe this? Do you believe this is a good idea? You just condemned it, but here's your prophet ordering it. So what's going on here? And you will see lots of people leave Islam, but you'll also see people become more radicalized. And so we've got a lot of work to do here.
Well, I want to end by saying if you are a Christian listening to this, pray like you've never prayed before for both the Muslims and the Jews right now, because I do believe that this is one of those moments in history that can actually cause one to change and to think. And if you're a Muslim listening to this, which I know I have some Muslims in the audience, I pray that this would be that the cognitive dissonance that you might be feeling in a moment like this would allow you to give way to self-reflection, pause, consider, and actually look in the mirror at this moment. And like everything David Wood has said, if it's really true that this is actually trickling downstream from the Quran itself, I really think that's something to pause and consider and reflect on. I say that with love. I don't have any hatred towards any Muslims whatsoever. I love you guys listening to this. But I think that because of that, sometimes love corrects, calls out, and points towards darkness in order to expose what is light as well. So with that being said, any last thoughts, David Wood?
No, just once again, bad situation in the world, and it's going to keep getting worse. And we got the gospel, and we need to share that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.